here we go.
Welcome to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome in to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Pat McCarthy, alongside my co-host, Scott Rudolph. Again, we are here to talk about quarterbacks and tight ends this week. We're going to stick with the same, I guess, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Format? Would it be a format?
That would be it. Thank you. I just totally brain farted. Appreciate it.
And I could smell it from here. So you're good. Don't sweat it.
So we're going to stick with the same format that we've been going with for our running backs and our wide receivers, which is basically figuring out which quarterbacks and tight ends we are a little bit farther apart on and discussing those guys and why we feel, obviously higher or lower than the other.
Definitely. I mean, obviously quarterbacks are an interesting part of fantasy football. Some people do value them, based on their season totals or the fact that, again, you have people that are getting you, in the top 10 to 12, they're probably getting you a solid 20 points a game, depending on bonuses, different things factored in. And then also, if you want to include that, you do have some quarterbacks that are fleet of foot that can get out of the pocket and suddenly become more instrumental in the running game. I mean, we've seen it from when we were kids where everybody was a pocket passer and you had Randall Cunningham, you had your Steve Youngs, and there were some guys prior to our Fran Tarkenton. You had guys that got out of the pocket, Archie Manning, people that scrambled to make things happen. Nowadays, you have to be 360 degrees. You have to have every piece of the pie to be that quarterback. Again, you still have your Tom Brady's of the world that just tell everybody to shove it, but he's going to play till he's 60 and he's just Tom Brady. There's no getting out of the way. But
yeah, he doesn't count when you talk about normal human beings.
No, Brandon Graham knows him really well from the Super Bowl, but we won't get into that.
They've met.
Yes, yeah, it shook hands actually. Right, that's why he dropped the ball. So yeah, I mean, again, we do have some differing opinions, some new faces in new places, and some people that are coming back from injury that I think, again, it's going to be interesting to see where this season takes us based on a 17-game schedule, depending on how far into your league you go with that. Obviously, certain leagues and teams might take it all the way to that 17th week now is added. Some people like to cut it off early so they maximize their best players. Again, it's a weekly game. So we're going to try to help you out on both the week and the season.
All right, man. So let's kick this thing off. For the most part, we're pretty status quo with standard quarterback ADP. And we're talking about, just so everyone's clear, we're talking about, your normal one QB leagues here. Obviously, the rankings are still the rankings, regardless of whether you're doing super flex or stuff like that. But when we're talking about ADPs and stuff like that, we're talking about your standard one quarterback, a non-super flex league. So we're pretty right on the consensus, the ADP, as far as, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen at the top. I guess the first place where we really start to differ is actually who we each have ranked 5. So we'll start with your 5th ranked quarterback, Jalen Hurts. You have him 5. I have him 11. Right now he is going in the 9th round, roughly. He's up roughly the 13th quarterback going off the board. So either way, both of us are a little bit higher on him than, the consensus, but you're much higher. And I'm interested to hear why, other than the fact that, he's your team's starting quarterback.
Well, and again, not to go super homer. It was interesting to see, last year, obviously, I'm a big Carson Wentz fan. I would say, part of the LTBB, if you listen to WIP here in Philly. And I'm still just stunned at what happened there. And I guess you want to say hedge bets, you maybe take the guy who's the backup and you see what's going on. And like a lot of fans were kind of stunned that the Eagles picked him with a 2nd round pick and the whole backstory and 2020 was just an insane year for that team. To see what happened once he got on the field, it was very interesting. I mean, he has been polarizing to an extent, but I mean, looking at what he's done in college, and for some people, he's maybe a little unfulfilled with transfers and championship games, but I mean, to look at again that next level of quarterback that can do it with his arms, that can do it with his legs. He came in, he had a couple gimmick plays, but then he came in relief in the Green Bay game, and it seemed like there was a little bit of a spark. And then they decided to send Carson to the bench and put him in, and that was the turning point for him. And he comes out and is just lights out in his first start against the New Orleans Saints, who at the time were rolling, had the number one defense in the league, and he made them look silly. And I mean, the game itself that he played, like here in Philly, a lot of people do, look around and see things happen and always wonder why me. And to see that come through and him play damn near an almost perfect game to an extent, again, against a team like that. Now, he was not perfect by any stretch. Passing wise, he had some incompletions and things of that nature, but to see the mobility, to run for over 100 yards, that just gave everybody, oh my God, like this might actually be happening. He put up numbers for the rest of the season, albeit in losses. And then at the end of the season, you turn around and see where, they were trying to lose a game against Washington and it just turned into whatever. He did amass some points through the season. So call it 4.5 games with a couple plays that he was on the field for. But to see 4.5 games go and to see Jalen Hurts still finish in the top 35 at quarterback, he played 4.5 games. I'm impressed. I tried to sit there and actually look at some of his stats and prorate them just from last year. If you did it over a 17 game season and looking at what he would have put up, and I know there's a knock on him for accuracy and things of that nature, but it looks like he would have thrown for, again, these are all hypotheticals, that he would have thrown for about 3,600 yards, 20 touchdowns, 14 picks, and taken about 44 sacks. And that was par for the course with the Eagles. Offensive line was poor. Wide receiver play was poor. But he still would have thrown for a reasonable amount of yards, especially as a rookie, just getting involved. The big part there is the other side of the ball where the running game, maybe he would have had close to it. But again, just averaging it out, he would have had close to 200 attempts, and he would have had close to maybe 1,200 yards with 10 rushing touchdowns. Again, ball control an issue. He definitely would have had some fumbles and things of that nature. But if you've based that off of PPR stats, for instance, like the ones that we have in our league, passing wise, he would have accounted for 222 points with some change. Rushing wise, he would have accounted for 173. You put those all together, and he would have had 395 points with a little change on the back end. And that would have been, in our league, he would have been quarterback number 2. He would have averaged 23 points a game. That's a fantasy quarterback. I mean, again, you look at what Josh Allen did last year. You look at Kyler Murray, and again, physically, Kyler Murray is not as strong as Jalen Hurts. Aaron Rodgers had a season for the ages, which got left on the plate. That was a shame for him. But looking at what Jalen Hurts brought to the table and what's happening right now in training camp with him, the rest of the world is just writing him off and figuring the Eagles are just going to make this trade for Deshaun Watson down the road. We talked about him a little bit, and we're going to get back into him. But I mean, at the end of the day, hearing what's going on, seeing the wide receivers finally playing, and again, that goes with the coaching staff as well. And if you look around in other circles, some of these guys and gals that know their fantasy, they see that the dual threat action, the ability to do what he does in a very small sample size. Now you're going to give him the opportunity. He's playing for his job because the Eagles have 2 first rounders and a potential 3rd first round pick all on the table for next year. So he's playing for a job in Philly, maybe somewhere else. This is his audition. And he got benched at Alabama and eventually transferred to Oklahoma. So he's used to having to move on and make things happen, but it shows that he can do it. And as a young man to be able to do that, to get into the NFL, his team is behind him 100%. And you have some veterans that have a Super Bowl ring that are all about the guy.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really argue with any of those points. I do think that he's got the potential to be a top five quarterback, no doubt, especially with that rushing baseline that you get from him. Like you said, I extrapolated those numbers out too during my research, and I got pretty much the same thing you did. I think my math's probably a little bit better, but we were close. So yeah, like you said, number two in a point on a points per game basis. Again, 4 games is a very small sample size to sort of extrapolate out into a full season, but you gotta work with what you're given, and what we were given from Hertz was 4 games, and so that's what we kind of have to base our rankings on moving forward this year. I think the biggest sort of drawbacks for me were, like you said, just the completion percentage. I know that hopefully with some more work in camp this year and COVID last year, that didn't really get a chance to have training camp. And obviously coming into camp, he would have been, at best the number 2 quarterback. So how much work he actually gets with, the starting wide receivers and tight ends is questionable anyway, but to at least sit back and learn the offense, to follow Carson Wentz and sort of his preparation going into the season. Hurts didn't have any of that, obviously. So I think this year, with the ability to sort of come in, get a training camp under his belt, and hopefully work on, his reads and his passing accuracy, I think that some of that passing accuracy will sort of automatically correct itself just based off of him knowing the offense a little bit better, knowing his teammates a little bit better, and their tendencies and things like that. But I think the thing that scares me about him is just the fact that, I said this before, and it's not something that I pride myself in mentioning as an Eagles fan, but I really just don't think the Eagles are going to be that good. I think they're going to be better on the defensive side of the ball than they are on the offensive side of the ball, which generally tends to lead to less passes, closer games, less offense in those games. And I think that just leads Hurts to be and I don't want to say a middling quarterback, like he's somewhere, around quarterback 16, but as far as middling, meaning, that 7, 8, 9 range, I think that's a little bit more likely for him to finish in that range than to finish, top 5 or completely out of, say, the top 12 altogether. But I have him ranked at 11 just because there are some other guys that I like a little bit better, and I'm a little bit more confident in their sort of ability to finish inside that top 12 or inside that top 5, let's say, based off of, what they have around them, past productivity, stuff like that. So that's really the only reason I have him 11. I will totally take my shot on him in the 9th round where he's going in drafts, for sure. I think he's got a huge upside. Usually if I'm going to do that, though, I'm going to try to back him up with another quarterback with upside, like a Matthew Stafford or, somebody along those lines, maybe a Joe Burrow, somebody who could have a great year, but could also just be average. I want 2 of those guys. Hurts is definitely on my radar, but if I pick him, I definitely want to make sure that I'm getting somebody to soften that blow if he turns out to not be, what I guess some in the fantasy community, including yourself, sort of expect him to be. All right, so let's move on to Prescott. Dak Prescott is our next quarterback that we're pretty far off on, strangely enough. I have him ranked at 4. You have him ranked at 14. Currently, he is going in the 5th round as the QB 6 off of the board. And for me, I just, I guess it's the same way you sort of extrapolated out Hurts's numbers from last year. I sort of did the same thing for Prescott. And for me, Prescott played roughly the same amount of games. He played in 4, went out in the 5th game. But he played a decent amount of that 5th game. So we'll call it 5 games altogether. If you look at what he scored in those games and just, obviously just divided it by 5 to figure out what he scored per game, he averaged 27.8 points per game, which, again, if you count Jalen Hurts and his 4 games in there, Hurts would have been the number 2 quarterback on a points per game basis. Dak would have been the number 1 quarterback on that points per game basis by a good 3.5 to 4 points. So it's, for as good of an ending to the year that Hurts had, Dak Prescott had just as good, if not a better, beginning of the year. He basically, like a more competent throwing quarterback in the NFL. He threw for 68% completion percentage and had 222 pass attempts in just, in those 5 games, which averages out to 44.4 attempts per game, which by far would have been the highest in the league last year as far as attempts go. Again, not saying that Dallas's defense is necessarily going to be as bad as they were last year, but I can't see that, a few draft picks improving things that much. Now, they did also replace their defensive coordinator, so there's a possibility that their defense could get better and they won't have to throw as much. But I feel like when you've got Dak Prescott as your quarterback, who's obviously, he's proven over the course of his career that, aside from last year, he's been a top 12 quarterback in fantasy every single year, scored over 300 points every single year. I feel like with a quarterback like Prescott, your 3 weapons on the outside with Cooper, Lamb, and Michael Gallup, and then you also have Zeke out of the backfield to throw to. You've got Blake Jarwin coming back, who is a better pass catcher than Dalton Schultz, and Schultz had a good year last year, going 63 catches for 615 yards. So, I mean, the Cowboys just have weapons on offense, and if they have to use them the way they did last year, I can't see Dak Prescott not being a top 5 guy. There's just, he's going to have to be that in order for the Cowboys to win games, and I think that there's enough talent on that offense for that to be the case.
Yeah. So again, your defense of Dak Prescott is well earned. I went back to, again, to look at some numbers on him, and he did have some serious stats. Not going to take that away from him. Not that I'm a big fan of Dak Prescott's by any stretch, but when it comes to fantasy football purposes, yeah, the guy puts up some numbers. He's coming off of a very serious injury. I don't think anybody can say that he's not a quarterback that has relied on his legs to get him where he needs to be. In his career, he's been known to be a guy to take off and run. And you look at last year, he looked like he was ready to go. I mean, it is a shame. I mean, that he got hurt the way he did. That team was rolling. I mean, again, if you projected some of the numbers for him, he would have thrown for over 4,000 yards. He would have been. It would have been like a season for the ages for him. Obviously, it got cut down too quick. My big worry is you have Amari Cooper is a wide receiver who's a little banged up, and I think he's a little banged up emotionally. I think he's a little mad that he went from being the guy to one of the guys, and he's not going to be able to be the most important wide receiver on that team. That to me is part of it. I think that his injuries, as far as both the leg and getting healthy again, and now in camp, there's some shoulder questions, there are MRIs. He hasn't really been throwing that much. I think the layoff may have affected him a little bit. If you look at his overall finishes fantasy-wise, from what I could read, it was he was 6th, 10th, 2nd. And again, last year looked like he was on his way to be a top 1 or 2 before everything changed. To me, there's a lot of people that are in the way of him. If he's lost any of his mobility and his ability to score touchdowns on his feet, that to me is going to be a little bit of a problem. I don't think he's a bad quarterback. And to me, it's really just making sure that he gets back to what he was before, which is the guy that can scramble down the field to make plays. You're coming back off a pretty bad fracture. I just look at people that I think are going to finish ahead of him. I think Matthew Stafford on the Rams is going to be finally a quarterback who has a coach that really wants to play offense and gives him some weapons. You have your Russell Wilsons ahead of him. I have Lamar Jackson ahead of him. Based on, again, he's healthy. You're not really worrying about that. And it looks like he's got some issues with his wideouts all getting hurt. So he's probably going to have to run for his life this year. Dak Prescott is definitely the potential, but there's a bunch of guys I want to put ahead of him because I'm a little concerned injury-wise with him. Again, the leg was one thing. You're definitely not going to get back to where you were, not right away. Might take a season. But to know that your throwing shoulders also has issues, and you have three wide receivers that are begging for the ball, it doesn't go to the tight end that much. And you look at a running back who's willing to take the load. At times last year got beat up a little bit more than you've ever seen because he was running that entire offense. I'm not seeing him being a top 5 quarterback. It's somewhere between maybe 14 and 9 to me as a possibility. And it's no slight on their offense, but physically, I want to see him on the field, and I want to see 2019 Dak. I don't want to see a Dak that's lost a step. And you look at players that go through an injury like that, and sometimes they bounce right back. But he's not a kid. He's 28 years old. So again, he's not fresh out of college coming off it and just knocking it away. He's got 4 or 5 seasons of NFL beat up on his body. Again, he's been known to scramble and known to score touchdowns with his legs. I mean, he's got 24 rushing touchdowns. And I think a couple times he led the league for quarterbacks rushing touchdowns. So again, his mobility is part of what makes him dangerous. He's not a runner, but when you give him the opportunity, he takes full advantage of it. If he can step up and literally show no issue with anything with the leg, and again, now with maybe the shoulder, yeah, then maybe my opinion would change. But right now, to me, he does fall outside of my top 10, but he's still a top 15 quarterback.
All right, so we also have a pretty big discrepancy. Strangely enough, we're right there with each other with Andy Dalton and Justin Fields. Not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one. It's just obviously you have Dalton at 23. I have him at 37. You have Fields at 38, and I have him at 24. So basically almost identically flip-flopped in our rankings. And I'm, assuming it's just because you're believing Matt Nagy and the fact that he is going to roll Andy Dalton out there and stick with him, as long as the Bears keep winning games, I'm assuming. I'm sort of on the other side of the coin there.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously this weekend you saw a second half where, Justin Fields looked like he had quite the opportunity to show that he's the guy. Part of what I'm looking at is everything in the media. I mean, Matt Nagy has not been known to be maybe the smartest coach in the room. They signed Andy Dalton, and they said he's our starter. They have put him out there to give him that opportunity, obviously, and he has been a starter for several teams. He helped Dallas out a lot last year, as a matter of fact. Justin Fields comes in as a first-round pick, a top guy that looks to have, again, that package of arm, mobility, the new NFL total package. I watched a few minutes of the preseason game against Miami, and when they first put him out there, you could see some jitters and you could see him not look comfortable. And again, you're out there with second and third stringers, so it's still moot, but you do want to see a little bit of an eye test when it comes to him. They went into the half and he didn't look that good. He had a fumble, tried to extend a play and did a Madden-esque spin move, maybe, to just show that he's got the moves.
Is that the pound on that circle button?
Oh, man, all day long. I mean, yeah, he's no Barry Sanders, trust me. But when it comes down to the second half and watching him come out and just unload, and again, I was privy to a few minutes of it, had to leave for work, but I did see that he's just started to compile stats, and they were in the air, they were on the ground. And I'm not a big caveat for a lot of this for me is the veteran quarterbacks that are in place. I feel that until it's proven that they're shaking off their spot, unless it comes out of camp that way. And if it does beforehand, yeah, I would absolutely. I think deep down, I think Justin Fields is the better quarterback. But I feel like these franchises are going to go with these guys long enough during the season and just wait for it and wait for it and wait for it. And Dalton's the kind of quarterback who can keep the team competitive. You look at Detroit in that division, you're not scared of them. They probably consider that 2 wins right off the bat. The other 2 teams in that division, Green Bay, who looks like, again, they're on a mission. Minnesota, a little bit of a transition perhaps, especially defensively. But again, the Bears, this is Matt Nagy's last year, probably, unless he makes the playoffs. So if he's smart enough down the road with a struggling team or a middling team to decide, we're going to make the switch. Sorry, this has to happen. Absolutely. I've never not been a fan of Andy Dalton, but he's always been that middle of the road kind of guy that, again, I have him at 23. You have him at 38. He's not going to be on your team. I mean, if you're in some 2 QB league, if you're in a super flex, he's a bye week guy, or you pick him up because he's got a hot streak. He was, really good with Cincinnati, but yeah, you weren't again, you weren't drafting him per se, let alone reaching for him. So me having him ahead of Fields isn't as much an indictment of Fields. It's really just the way that I think they'll kind of roll into the season, where they might give Dalton 3-4 games unless there's some real big issues.
I personally think that Andy Dalton can keep the job. I don't think he's going to. I think that, like you said, if their opening schedule, who I think they open against, Detroit. They open against the Rams, and then if they play Detroit week 2. So the Rams, obviously, I don't expect them to win that game. Detroit week 2, they probably should beat Detroit. I feel like Detroit's going to be one of the worst teams in the league. But if they go 0-2 and don't win that game that they're more than likely going to be favored in against Detroit, I think that's it for Dalton. And I think once Fields does take over, I mean, I have him ranked at 24. But that's just because I don't think he's going to obviously start. I do believe Dalton is the starter and Fields, will get his opportunity at some point. But if you told me right now that Justin Fields was the starter week 1, I'd probably have him up somewhere around 12 or 13. That's how talented I think he is. I actually researched some stats of his from college, and I knew he was good at Ohio State, but I didn't realize how good his numbers were. In just 2 years, he threw for 5,373 yards, 63 passing touchdowns, and only 9 interceptions. That's a 7-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. Now, I know that, obviously NFL defenses are a lot better, and 7-to-1 is sort of Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady territory. But then I looked at his rushing numbers and realized that he ran the ball in those 2 years for an additional 867 rushing yards and 15 more touchdowns. And I was like, wow, man, I did not realize how special he was in college. I mean, I do remember watching Ohio State games and watching him play and thinking how, he was really good, but I don't think I realized the numbers that he was amassing in just a short time at Ohio State. So I do think it's just a matter of time before he gets in there. And I think that I would draft Justin Fields late, keep him on my bench and just kind of, wait for his opportunity to get into that starter's role. And I think you got yourself a potential top 12 quarterback.
No, I think Justin Fields is beyond talented. And yes, looking at those numbers in an interesting Big Ten that sometimes you can beat up on some of them teams, your Indianas and your Marylands and your Rutgers of the world. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, even back in the day, he was originally, I think he committed to Penn State and then bounced and went to Ohio State, or he transferred or something.
Yeah, he was a transfer.
Yeah. And again, he comes from Georgia, as far as I believe birth state. So, again, he probably, I don't know his high school stats. I haven't gone that deep on him, but yeah, he strikes me as a guy that in 4 or 5 years, he'll probably be one of the faces of the league. And I don't think we'll be debating his status as far as, compared to being a starter. I think we'll be debating him as being a top 5 quarterback based on what he brings to the table for points. So yeah, I'm again totally on board with Justin Fields. I just feel like the Bears will roll out good old Andy Dalton for a few weeks, and again, if it sticks, they'll go with it. As long as they don't follow suit of Philly and throw Fields out for some gimmick plays, and it just fails.
Yeah, I don't think he's a gimmick guy. I think you either go with him or you don't. I don't think that his rushing ability is to the point where he's going to be like a Taysom Hill, where they mix packages in like a Trey Lance that they're talking about in San Francisco, having some packages specifically for him. I think either Fields is a starter or he's not. And once he does become the starter, I think he's going to be pretty relevant in fantasy. But let's go ahead and move on to one last quarterback that I wanted to talk about. You and I sort of talked about this before the podcast a little bit. I just want to discuss Deshaun Watson a little bit. I know that obviously there's a lot of stuff going on in his whole legal situation, and we don't know for sure that he's going to play this year or that he's not. What I will say about Watson is obviously in the last 3 years that he's played, 3 full seasons, he's been the QB5 each year. And I don't see any reason why, if he played a full season this year, any of that would change. Now, again, a full season I don't think that his civil case, I don't think there's any resolution to that before the season starts, but I'm not opposed to drafting him again, like a Justin Fields, drafting him late, putting him on your bench. We mentioned in our episode, our initial episode, the draft tips and strategies about utilizing that IR spot. I think that Deshaun Watson is an excellent candidate for something like that this year, drafting him, with one of your last few picks. And then if he does get on that commissioner's exempt list, which seems like is a probable place for him to end up, go ahead and move him into your IR, keep him there, pick somebody up off of the waiver wire that you could have drafted in the 15th round or whatever. And now you've got Deshaun Watson in case he does play. I don't think anybody's going to trade for him until there's more information about his legal situation. But if something does happen and he does get traded to, a team that makes sense, like let's say Denver, with all of the talent they have at the wide receiver and tight end position, I just think that there's a potential there for him to be a top 5 quarterback again this year. Maybe not all year, but on a week to week basis, there's an opportunity for him to be a top 5 guy. And I don't think you could just pass on that because you're unsure of, whether he's going to play this year or not. Especially, like I said, if you're able to put him in to like an IR spot or something like that.
Deshaun Watson, the player, he, again, you have him down at 19. And again, like you said, you're looking at more of a stash, a wait and see, because you're still not 100% sold on maybe whether or not he's got anything that's going to hold him back. And he's been showing up to camp and doing everything he needs to do. And, the coaches, they all say the same. He shows up, he does his job, he puts in the time, he does the work. But the biggest thing is to see what came out today, kind of to me is the cherry on top, that, whether or not it's legit, but the 3 letters that I saw today were FBI. And this, albeit a civil case, if you have some borderline class action lawsuit by this many women, based on what's happened to him, again, allegations, he has not been convicted or anything of that nature. But you see how much of this is floating around right now. And to see that was mentioned, and again, a direct quote was that Tony Busby told the Associated Press that the FBI reached out to me and I responded. That, to me, is the ultimate red flag, where I think, the league wants to protect the shield no matter what. But they'll turn on this guy in a second if he's going to drag him down. You have a franchise that, even with Deshaun Watson on their team, isn't expected to do much. Again, he's their whole team. He's the highlight reel. He's the guy they need to build around. But that franchise has been taking on water for a while. You saw J.J. Watt, who was the franchise, walk away from it. They let Bill O'Brien destroy that team and trade away Hopkins for a beat up David Johnson and a bag of balls kind of thing. Like, they've made some quirky trades, getting Laramie Tunsil in there. This whole franchise isn't run right. It sounds almost like it's Washington South. You hear Daniel Snyder and what's gone on there, and they slapped him on the wrist and did some stuff. But now to see that a player of his caliber, a franchise guy, a face of the league, and this comes out and you see that those 3 letters, FBI, comes out, to me, I'm done. There's no way I would get involved with this player, because that's great. He comes out and he plays 4 games, 6 games for you. And again, he might win you weeks, but the slap down that could come on a suspension from the league alone, let alone if he gets drug into court and things of that nature, like, it's just, there's nothing there to tell me that this is going to end well for anybody. And I feel that it's a shame, because at least on the field, talented young player. And I hope that somehow this isn't true or it's embellished. But again, you're bordering on like the Bill Cosby levels of that many people coming out. And we've seen what's happened there. The league, the team, to me, it's a matter of time before they cut ties with them. You say FBI to me for Deshaun Watson, and I'm done.
I agree. I'm not drafting him as a top 10 quarterback. I was talking more about drafting him late if there's a lot of other people in your league that are like you, who just are like, yeah, no, I'm done with the guy, whether it be for fear of him not playing or just, some people will just not draft a guy because they're like, nah, I'm not cool with what he allegedly did, that's fine. And I'm not saying that you have to go out and get this guy. I'm just saying if he doesn't get drafted, I'll pick him up. Like I said, if he ends up being IR eligible, I'll keep him on my IR spot until I need that spot for somebody else. And if I don't, I'll just hold him there for the entire season until, who knows? You never know what's going to happen. The whole FBI thing that came out today, that was actually sort of good news for him. The FBI is actually questioning some of the women in that case and questioning Deshaun Watson himself, because he's actually sort of, I guess, counter accusing at least one of those women with trying to extort money from him. So this is sort of his playback at, you're accusing me of something. Well, now I'm also accusing you of trying to get something from me. So again, I'm not saying that I know anything about the legal situation other than what I've read. But as far as fantasy football goes, not talking real football here, to have a guy like that who can produce at that level, yeah, sure, I'll stick him on my bench. But again, that's just me, and I don't necessarily know that everybody else is going to think that way. And if he never pans out, or if he doesn't pan out at all this year, then what did it cost me other than a roster spot that I wasn't using anyway? Is all.
True. Yeah. If you want to stash him, go for it. I think that you're well within your rights to do it. For me, you feel that it's worth it to hang on to him because maybe it shakes out. But personally, I would just stay away. And that's where, again, you and I agree to disagree on that. I got burnt, I think, back in the day with Adrian Peterson when everything went down with him back in the day. And I just, and part of it for me too is personal on a certain level where I'm a guy who doesn't take Cowboys, Giants, or Washington football team players because I'm an Eagles fan. So I see somebody like that on my team and I would just downgrade him and stay away, but I'm just an idiot.
Let's dive into the tight ends because we have a few of these guys that we want to talk about as well. And we don't want to cut the tight end short. They already sort of get the short end of the stick in fantasy for the most part. So except for maybe your top few guys. So I don't want to cut them off and not give them some talk here on the podcast. So the first guy that we're going to talk about is Logan Thomas of the Washington football team. I'm surprised you even looked at his name, considering he plays for Washington. But you actually have him ranked higher than I do. Believe it or not, you have him ranked at 5. I have him ranked at 11. He's going in, your PPR drafts. He's going as the tight end 9 in around the 9th round. So he's sort of right in between where we have him ranked. Last year finished 6th overall. I'll start with him because I have some numbers that I'll go over and I'm sure you probably have some numbers that will rebut some of the stuff that I'm saying. But so his 6th overall finish last year ended up coming on 110 targets, which for me, I don't think that with Ryan Fitzpatrick as their quarterback is necessarily repeatable. He's not a big play guy. He made most of his hay in the red zone. He had 6 touchdown receptions last year. All 6 of them were in the red zone. He didn't have a single play on the season over 30 yards. And I know, as a tight end, that's not necessarily, you don't see those guys going for 80 and a touchdown very often. But the fact that he didn't do that, not saying that he's not able to, but the fact that we didn't see it last year does raise a little bit of concern as to, his explosiveness in the passing game and what he can bring if he doesn't get that same number of targets as he did last year, which again, with the addition of Curtis Samuel, with, what we're hearing out of Washington about the increased usage of Antonio Gibson in the passing game. They still have JD McKissick there, who's going to take some passes out of the backfield. But the biggest thing for me is Fitzpatrick. He's not the type of quarterback that really targets his tight ends all that much. He tends to favor his number one guy. Fitzpatrick he's a Harvard guy, so he's pretty smart. He tends to throw the ball to his best option as early and as often as possible, which is a really good thing for Terry McLaurin, but I think unfortunately a bad thing for Logan Thomas. I think if he remains a valuable piece in the red zone the way he did last year, I think he'll finish with less targets, less receptions, probably less yardage, but with better quarterback play, could potentially finish with a few more touchdowns. But I don't think that brings him much higher than, maybe a top 10 guy. But again, that's my opinion. And that's sort of the way I see his role in Washington being this year.
I don't disagree with your assumption as much as maybe you would think. Looking at the different guys that we have in place in our rankings, tight end wise, I think it's hard to see maybe that much regression. Again, I get what you're saying with Fitzpatrick being a guy who maybe doesn't target them as much. He is going to come into an offense that's going to demand that he does, again, follow a script, follow a playbook. You're going to build a rapport in camp with guys. And the thing with Fitzpatrick, if you're going to look at him on a whole level there, is that he's been a journeyman. I mean, his best years were with the Jets. I guess you want to say that. I mean, every time you see him, you're pulling for the guy, you're rooting for the guy, because you do see where he's a scrappy quarterback. I don't want to say you'd want him on your team, but again, he is a guy that you do see that guts it out. And yeah, he's been known for his smart. To see what Logan Thomas put up last year, again, another guy who's a journeyman. He's bounced around for a few different teams for a few different years now. He was with Arizona, Buffalo, rotted in Detroit, and comes around and goes to Washington and has a career season. And it wasn't like you said, it wasn't something that was maybe epic where he was making all these crazy plays, but he just put in the work. He became a dependable guy for a team that had Dwayne Haskins was your quarterback there for a little bit. And then you had Alex Smith, and you ended up with, Heineke and those guys that kind of got you over the hump, so to speak, again. And they were the skinniest kid at fat camp. They won the division and went into the playoffs. And again, you were more focused on the Alex Smith story, but he was a guy, I think, last year who kind of got lost in the shuffle for what he really did as a contributor, known as a blocker a little bit too. But yes, he can get out and make the catches. He's only been in the league for a little bit. There was a spell where he was out of the league for, looks like, about 3 years. So, I mean, to see him come back, to dedicate himself and see his game totals increase and to see his numbers increase, he looks like a guy who is on the cusp of being a player that he's not going to be a Travis Kelce making 20-yard plays down the field and stretching the defense out. That's why they have McLaurin. That's why they got, like you said, Curtis Samuel. They have a couple other young players. And yeah, supposedly they're looking to make Antonio Gibson into Christian McCaffrey, which if you can make that happen, then again, you've taken away everything off the team, and he's going to run for, his all purpose will be 2,000 yards, and this conversation is pointless. I think that he's a guy who, to see him get the volume that he did from maybe check downs and things like that is one concept. But if he's a guy that they know they can go to, and I think a lot of teams in the league now are starting to see the tight end position become more and more important, where, again, previously you were a blocker and a gimmicky guy that went out and made a play, into a point where if you have the athleticism, you can command the football. Again, he's not a Travis Kelce. He's not a big shot Bob Tonyan by any stretch, but no, he definitely, I think he's going to be a player that people are going to overlook.
All right, next up is Zach Ertz. You recently moved him up in your rankings. I know, we have updated our rankings a few times in the offseason. We try not to go nuts, and at least I try not to go nuts and tweak my rankings based off of every piece of news and every highlight reel and, everything that comes out in training camp. I try to take it all in and sort of, maybe once a week go in and make a few tweaks. But you moved Ertz up a little bit. I believe you moved Goddard down a little bit in your rankings.
Yeah, I did. And a lot of that to me is still based off of, again, to me, Zach Ertz he's won me leagues. I was on a tight end train back in the day as a keeper, and people looked at me twice. And that was just a little bit before your Kelce's and your Kittles. And again, even look at Darren Waller. He had a run of seasons where, culminating, so to speak, in 2018, with over, 116 catches. He's got the record for tight ends. He had over 1,000 yards. Yeah. Is he no yak, Zach? Yes, he is. He catches his dub ball and he falls down. but he gets you first downs and he makes receptions and he gets touchdowns. Last year, you saw a little bit of a chink in the armor, and I think everybody was salivating over Dallas Goedert as being, oh, yeah, it's his time now. And you did lose Zach Ertz for 5 games, and he wasn't healthy for a lot of the other ones that he played. He had a pretty bad ankle injury that seemed to take him out of sorts. And again, the Eagles' offense last year as a whole was just, you weren't sure if you were watching the same team, where, again, they weren't the greatest in the world prior to 2020, but they were never as bad as they were last year. And that's what really sunk the ship. You saw career lows in targets and receptions and yardage and yards per reception. Ironically, he did have one of his longest catches of his career, so go figure. And you only have 1 touchdown. There's been a lot of issues with him in a sense. He wants to get paid. He wants one of those top tight end contracts. And unfortunately, because of his age and the timing of things, he's just not going to get it. He's still making over $8 million a season to wear midnight green. And he is still the number 1 tight end on this team. Dallas Goedert has shown flashes of potential. He has shown that he can make a couple big plays. But the reason that Dallas Goedert makes the plays that he does is because he is the second tight end, and he is the blocking tight end. If you look where he's made his success, it's staying in and blocking and then releasing into the flat, or releasing downfield past the linebacker and into like the second and third levels of a defense. Carson Wentz was a threat to run, make plays. So that was that offense. He benefited so much from that. And again, as far as the other guy on the other side, Zach Ertz, that tight end, because of what he brought to the table, he had a guy on him all the time. He was the Eagles' number 1 wide receiver for years. And think about that, where their wide receiving core was so poor. Their running backs made plays. Sure, they did some wheel routes and dump offs, but Zach Ertz was the number 1 wide receiver on the team for 5 years. Again, setting records at his position for what he did. And I think that's why he feels he's a little slighted for what he brought to the table. Made 2 of the biggest catches in Eagles history, which people do forget with all the other plays. First down to keep it going, and the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. I don't think that he is washed up and he's done. I think people are a little worried that, because he hits 30, that's it, game over. And they saw him fall apart a little bit last year. The whole team fell apart. The entire offense fell apart. Just looking at the preseason game the other night, he was out there with Hurts. He's going to be a guy that Hurts is going to look for. He's an established veteran. If he was on another team, if he gets traded to Buffalo, if he goes to Indy to get reunited with Wentz or something along those lines, he's going to be the starter. And he's going to be the starter on this team because he's better than Dallas Goedert. I'm sorry to say. People may not believe that. People might think that Goedert it has that next level. But if Goedert was better than him in 2018 and 2019 when he was on the roster, he would have been the starter. He would have overtaken him. And he wasn't able to do that. And he's never going to be able to do that for another year or 2. I think Ertz still has a good 2-3 years left, albeit maybe not all with the Eagles. I am not going to fade him. He's not a top 5 anymore unless the volume goes back to him. They're loving their wide receivers right now in camp. Zach Ertz, to me, until he proves, and again, I don't think last year proves it for me, until he proves he just doesn't have it left. I still see him as the Eagles' number 1 tight end, and he's kicking right around the top 10. And I wouldn't be shocked if he finished in the top 10 at the end of the year.
So last year wasn't your idea of him falling off?
The injury really did it for me, knowing that he was just not healthy and he had a lot in his head with the contract and stuff. And I think he hasn't moved on, but I think it's almost driving him just to prove people wrong.
I don't really have much to add on Ertz. The only thing I will say that sort of stuck out to me was, and a point that I sort of made a note of when looking at Ertz, was the fact that I think he is, those years where he was, like you said, the guy, those years, there wasn't really many other options on the team. They had okay wide receivers in some of those seasons. I feel like in order for the Eagles to be good and actually make the playoffs or at least contend for a playoff spot, Hurts is going to have to sort of spread the ball around a little bit more. Ertz is going to have to compete with some other players on that team for targets. And I know, like I said, you said you didn't rank him in your top 5. You have him at 11. I probably have him too low at 29. And I probably will move him
for Homer too, man. I'm a little upset with that.
Well, I have Goddard much higher. I feel like this is the year that Goddard does take over. I still think that there's a shot that Ertz doesn't play for the Eagles this entire season. I don't
Could increase his
necessarily.
value.
It could. I was just about to say I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing for his fantasy value. I don't, however, see him staying on the Eagles and having the target share that he's going to need in order to, return as a top 12 tight end. That's just my personal opinion. Like I said, 29 is probably too low, and I probably will move him up in my rankings, but for me, he's not really a guy that I'm going to target and draft and put on my team. Even if you're looking in Dynasty, even if he's got a good year or two, or maybe even 3 years left, how good are those years, and how sure are you that there are that many good years left? So I don't think that. Trust me, being an Eagles fan, I love Zach Ertz. I think that, like you said, those years that he was the guy for our team, he was great. I mean, he was everything that you would want in a tight end. And I unfortunately, I just think his time is coming to an end, either with the team or, hopefully not for him, but possibly even his career as a whole. All right. And the last guy that we're going to talk about, and we're going to do this pretty briefly because he doesn't really matter on most fantasy teams. But if you're playing in a tight end premium league, or perhaps a dynasty league or something like that, it's possible that drafting this guy might be something that you might want to do. But Eric Ebron from the Pittsburgh Steelers last year finished 15th overall. Right now he's going as tight end 26 off of the board, which is basically undrafted, and rightly so. Like I said, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on him. Just I have a little bit more confidence in Ebron than you do. I have him at 19. You have him at 31. My thing with Ebron is he's just one of those guys who, I'm not saying he's going to be a top 12 guy. Obviously, I have him ranked at 19, so I don't even have him in the top 18. But I do think he's a guy that, at least in the beginning of the season, you can pick him up and stream him if you miss out on a tight end, a top 6 or 7 tight end. You could pick up Eric Ebron and start him, as a spot start in a few games here and there. Had 5 top 10 games in only 15 games played last year. So about a third of the time he was giving you top 10 results. And he was just barely out of the top 12. I think he finished 13th and 14th for the week 2 of the other 10 weeks that he played. So he's not a guy who is really going to win you a week or win you a league, but he's a guy who you can at least attempt to stream if your tight end gets hurt, or if you draft a guy and they turn out to be a bust. I think Ebron's a guy who he's still going to get some red zone targets. He was tied for the team lead last year with 18 red zone targets. So I still think he's, in the land of those touchdown dependent tight ends who don't really get a lot of targets and yardage. He is a guy who I think Roethlisberger likes around the end zone, and I think we'll find quite a few times around the end zone this year.
I've never not been a fan of Easy E, Eric Ebron. He was a guy.
I like
here's a guy.
I like
he had some time there with the Colts, and he was a player that seemed like he was going to be. He was almost a transition player from a traditional blocking tight end who can make some plays out of the backfield to some of your more athletic guys that are focal points of the offense. And he always looked like he had that potential. Never could quite get over the hump, so to speak. But yeah, definitely serviceable, and definitely was almost like with like the Eagles. You had some teams that were really in weird spots. You had the Steelers, who were running the league last year undefeated, and once they lost a game, it was over. Like, they literally fell off a cliff. Roethlisberger, he never looked quite right last year, but with all the weapons they have as wide receivers, which is part of the reason I'm not big on Ebron now. You saw Deontay Johnson come into his own. Juju is a talent without question. And you had this guy, Chase Claypool, who, a lot of people shrugged and rolled their eyes when they drafted him. I think he was the third part of that. And yes, Ebron still did finish because he did make some big plays. He did have some impact on the offense. The running game for the Steelers last year was a little suspect because Connor was banged up once again. He gave you everything he could, but they couldn't quite get it together. Going into this season, you carry over the wide receivers You enter Najee Harris, who a lot of people have him as a fantasy darling because he comes out of Alabama and he's a guy who looks a little bit to be that wrecking ball, big play, running back, maybe a future Derrick Henry in the making. Again, Alabama puts out the pros. A big reason, too, that I'm not high on Ebron is they did draft Pat Freiermuth from Penn State, second round, I believe. And I think they're looking at him to be that next level tight end. He put up the stats in college. Again, he comes from a great program at Penn State. And I just feel like he's got maybe a year left on the roster. And through the season, you'll see, the rookie start to make his play and get a little bit more involved in the offense. So not fading him from existence, but I feel this is a transition year where, again, he may stick with them for another year or two. Or to me, again, I just see he's a little long in the tooth for me to be that guy. And you're not going to draft a tight end in the second round. And you say, okay, yeah, he's only 28, but a tight end position, you're borderline offensive lineman, but he's put up some numbers in the past. Does he have something left in the tank? Yeah, absolutely. But Pittsburgh's going to be a different team this year. I think they're going to try to open up the offense a little bit more. But with the issues they have on losing offensive linemen, I think that he may be staying in to protect a little bit more until Ben shows that he's got, pardon the expression, any mobility left. So, yeah, I think Freiermuth overtakes him. And to me, Ebron, definitely undraftable. But, yeah, he's not a guy that I'm circling the wagons to make sure I get a hold of, even in free agency.
All right, man. So I think that does it. That wraps up our quarterbacks and tight ends episode. Hopefully anybody listening to this will be able to, at least gain some sort of, maybe we mentioned something that they hadn't thought of or something they hadn't heard before. So hope to put out some good information to anybody listening.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I haven't gone this in depth on tight ends since I think my bachelor party. So, I definitely want to, put something out there, make sure people understand that we are doing this for fun, and, we're going to be wrong maybe more times than we're right, but, at least one of us will. But at the same time, I definitely see us, moving on to bigger and better things through the season. We have talked about the quarterbacks, the running backs, the wide receivers, and the tight ends. No, we are not going to get into kickers. We are not going to get into defenses, and we are not going to do any IDP. I'm not into that. So at the end of the day, I think, moving forward, we're going to talk about draft concepts, maybe a mock, a little side bet, I guess, between us. We're already in 2 leagues now together, head to head. And I think the next level.
So now you want to lose at a mock draft too? Is that what you're getting at?
I'm sorry. I'm just looking down at my shirt. It still says 3-time champ, and that's in your league, as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken. So, at the end of the day, I do appreciate your donations, and I look forward to a larger one, as well as everybody else in the next one. Getting back to the legitimacy of where we're at with this, it's been a lot of fun the first few weeks, and again, we're trying to get a little bit stronger social media. I have joined Twitter, and I am hooked. I really shouldn't have done it. I learned it by watching you, Pat. And I do enjoy it. It's neat. And again, hopefully we get the word out, because the 9 routes where it's at. I think if everybody really gets into this the way we're expecting and supports us, we are going to keep this going for a long time. I'm having a lot of fun working with my best friend here. And again, we'll keep things going through the season, and hopefully, maybe we get the parade on Broad Street again. We'll see if we get to that level. Of course, that means that it's the apocalypse, and we'll just have to go with it.
We might have to throw a parade for you winning another championship. I think that's going to happen before the Eagles do, unfortunately.
I did win one the year we won one. So, I mean, at the same time, things do coincide. It's almost like an eclipse, you're kind of at the same time, they just cross paths, ships in the night, so to speak. But definitely, man, I'm looking forward to this NFL season. 17 games will be interesting. And I guess we got to talk about that too, what kind of an effect it has on our league and other leagues if we're driving, the extra week for points, because I already made one person quit because they were mad that we went extra weeks. So I don't want to keep the pattern going.
Yeah, we'll figure that out at the draft this year, what we're going to do with the 17th game, and whether we're going to included in our playoffs or not. But that's a discussion for another time. Hopefully, like you said, hopefully we'll be able to get together one more time before the season starts and do a quick little mock draft episode. I think that'll be fun. But if not, you will hear this content right before the season starts. And like I said, hopefully it helps. So hopefully it helps you in your drafts, and hopefully what we bring you during the regular season helps you week to week to make the moves that you need to make to win your fantasy league. So with that, we're going to sign off for now. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you back here next week, folks.
See you next week, folks. Take care.